So yeah, just maybe by means of a short introduction for the recording. My name is Caitlin. I'm the Atlantic Regional Coordinator for the Bauta Family Initiative on Canadian Seed Security. And I'm joined today by Chris Sanford of Yonder Hill Farm on the south shore of Nova Scotia, right?
Yeah.
Who is going to be doing a little intro as part of our community grow out program to sunflower seed saving, the ins and outs of that. So thanks so much for being here with us, Chris. And if you want to give a little intro and then we can dive into Q&As, I think that would be a great way to start.
Yeah. Yes. Well, hi, everyone. Yeah, my partner and I co-own Yonder Hill Farm, where we produce about 200 varieties of vegetable seeds, also herbs, flowers, grains, including sunflowers. And yeah, we offer them for sale through our website. We retail locally. We wholesale to a small seed company. So yeah, that's a little bit about us, I guess. We've been doing it for, well, over 10 years now, starting to lose track a little bit. Yeah, sunflowers is a great one, just sort of on the starter list. I think, yeah, it's certainly one of the first that I started saving seeds. And yeah, I guess I'll kind of go through what we do at the farm for our sunflowers, and then sort of talk a little bit about sort of scaling down and what you can do just in smaller gardens or backyard grow outs and stuff. So we've decided to, up until this point, work with one variety of sunflower. We are fairly isolated where we are. Our farm is at least 1 kilometer away from other gardens and probably more than that. So I sort of hope that continues. As much as I love to promote people gardening, I'm glad that my neighbors don't garden currently, because sunflowers, the biggest thing about sunflowers is that they will cross. All the different varieties of sunflowers will readily crisscross with each other because the bees do the pollinating, and they are what they call an outcrossing or cross-pollinating species. Luckily, in our part of the world, there's not the wild sunflower. I guess that's more prevalent sort of in the middle part of the continent. There is, I guess, a wild sunflower, which is the same species. It's what was domesticated from. And so that becomes a big issue for seed saving in those areas. So luckily, you just have to worry about sunflowers in your garden and adjacent gardens. The isolation distance for seed saving to try to be true to type and keep a variety going is about a half a mile, which is about 800 meters. So almost 1 kilometer. Now, the thing to keep in mind with that, and I never want people to feel discouraged from seed saving. The thing to remember about that is that that's a bit of a bell curve. It's not like automatically there's going to be a ton of crossing. The closer it is, the more crossing there will be. So there are some strategies you can use, such as if you planted sunflowers sort of in a square shape or a block, and you only saved seeds from the very center, chances are you're going to have very low crossing, even if there's sunflowers within that isolation distance, because the bees are, for the most part, going to travel in from the outside of your block. And so by the time they get to the inside, hopefully they're only really covered with pollen from your variety that you're growing out. So we can talk a little bit more about other strategies and stuff. But so if you have, say, in your garden, more than one variety of sunflower growing, they will cross for sure, like quite a bit. If you're growing a variety of sunflower and, say 1/4 mile away, there's some sunflowers growing, you'll have some percentage of crossing. And so it might be not as much of a concern, depending on what you're saving the seeds for. For us, the variety that we've chosen to work with is called Paradovic oilseed sunflower. And we were very interested in growing the sunflower potentially for larger scale planting, for oil seed production. It's a black sunflower seed. We could press oil or use it as poultry feed and stuff like that. So we wanted to find a variety to work with that was open pollinated and an oil seed kind of crop. And the characteristic of this type of sunflowers, they're fairly short. They're maybe 5 feet tall, and they have a single head. So they'll grow kind of to a fairly uniform height and have a nice big central head on each one. We plant them, we direct seed. Some people, and I have done before in the past, transplanting of sunflowers. That's mostly a concern where you're worried about birds or other critters eating your seeds that you plant. We kind of go for it because we're growing quite a large population. We're usually growing, I don't know, at least 100 plants or more. You want to be growing, ideally you're growing at least 20 plants that you're saving seed from. I have a great book which I would like to recommend. It's kind of a really great go-to book. I'm going to try to hold it up here. I brought it along. Called The Seed Garden, and it's put out by the Seed Savers Exchange, which is an organization in the US promoting, seed saving. And one of the things I really like about the book, and I'll hold up the page for the intro, it goes through every species, and it gives a little table right at the front that kind of gives you all the big facts that you need to know. So it's a great quick reference. And one of the things they do is for population size, they actually break it down into 3 categories. And I really appreciate this because I find that sometimes you get into, reading different books and they tell you different things about how big of a population you need in order to get good seeds. And this book breaks it down to, the first category is for viable seeds. So how many plants do you have to save from to get seeds that will grow again? And for some things like tomatoes or beans that are a self-pollinating plant, you only need one plant, and you'll get seeds that will grow again. For sunflower, they say 5 plants. The next category is for variety maintenance. And that is where you're actually trying to save seeds year to year and preserve a variety, keep a variety going. If you keep only saving seeds from the number of plants you need for viable seeds, you'll end up with inbreeding basically, and a very small genetic diversity. And so I tend to look at this sort of as my minimum for us as what we do as producing commercial seeds. If you're going to share your seeds with other people, if you're going to want to be saving them from year to year. So for sunflowers, for variety maintenance, it's 20 to 50 plants. And then the third category is for genetic preservation. And that's especially if you're working with a really rare variety where you couldn't just go get new seeds of it if you found that there was a problem with your variety. And for sunflowers, it's 80 plants. So definitely I would try to aim for 20 plants minimum if you were going to be year to year planning to save seeds. I don't think that should be discouraging if you're, say right now you have fewer than 20 that you're planning to save seed from. That's totally fine. Still save it. You just have to be aware that you might have a bit of a bottleneck, like from this year, where you have a smaller population. So for the next years, you'd want to increase your numbers that you're saving from. So yeah, we plant our direct seeded in rows. We use a seeder now, and I think it drops the seed about every 4 to 6 inches. I'm trying to think what we space our rows at. we started alternating years growing sunflowers because there's an insect pest that gets into the seeds. That's a type of weevil. And we were starting to see more and more of it. They'd make a little hole in the seeds. You can kind of see them, see the hole anyway. And so what we found is if we alternate years, grow sunflowers one year and don't grow sunflowers the next year, we get a decreased amount of that type of insect in our seeds. So this is an off year. Last year we grew quite a big patch. I don't know, it was probably about 40 feet long by maybe 12 or 15 feet, sort of a big rectangle. And so they're fairly easy. I find that, fertility wise, they're medium feeders. So we've definitely grown them in some years in poorer soil, and they just grow shorter and have smaller heads. It doesn't really affect the genetics. If you like, it doesn't cause all of the genetics to be small all of a sudden. It's an environmental factor. So, if we grow them in richer soil the next year, then they're back up to being, 5 feet, etc. And for us, so when they're growing, basically right before the blooms open, so it's ideally before they start making pollen, you want to go through your sunflowers and do what they call roguing or selection. It sort of means the same thing. Selection is a nice way to look at it because you're basically selecting the plants that you're going to allow to go to seed. So for us, we go and we're looking for things like a single head. We pull any plants that have more than one flower that's going to open because that's a characteristic that we don't want in the variety. There are, of course, some varieties that you want the multi-stemmed heads or the multi-headed plant. So you would be doing the opposite. You'd be pulling out all of the plants that only have one head on them. You also want to select for things like the plant stature, so how tall, or and also just like how well, like you want sunflowers that are nice and sturdy, right? So we'll go through and kind of pull out any spindly ones also. Sometimes that's going to be environmental, and probably most times. Like they just got a little overcrowded or something, but it's just good practice to be saving seed from really nice, robust plants. You want to look at the size of the head. So depending on which variety you're growing, you want to be aiming for a certain size of the head. And one thing that weather like today helps with is selecting for what they call lodging or resistance to lodging. Lodging is when something falls over from the wind. And, you want to have that not happen. And so it can be helpful to go through and pull out ones that are falling over, especially before they bloom. But the selection process, it's nice to start it before the blooms open because then you're actually removing those plants from the gene pool. But certainly it helps to also be selecting all the way through because you're still going to be removing, like even though that plant's pollen probably is in some of the other seeds, you're removing basically that mother plant where like all of the seeds have the genetics of that plant. And so if you have a stand of sunflowers and there's a small percentage of them that have fallen over even after the seeds have set, if you pull those, then we are working towards selecting for a stronger root system. So so we kind of tend to try to look at them a few times while they're growing and select, and then we start to watch them, the sunflower seeds get dry. And we're not the only ones watching. The birds are a very good indicator of when the seeds are fully mature because they will start to eat them, especially blue jays. And so, we really watch them. We have a lot of pressure from the birds. So what we found we need to do, ideally you want to leave them in the field to dry down as far as possible. The thing about sunflower seeds, when they're fully mature, they still have a lot of moisture in them. So you can't just pick them and, and process them immediately. You need to let them dry further. Basically, you look at the back of the sunflower head. It's kind of neat. The bloom happens, the heads get heavy, the petals fall off, and they tend to sag down. Probably everybody's seen that happen with their sunflowers. And then the back of the head, the sunflower head, goes from green to yellow to sort of this purplish browny color. And ideally, you don't want to be cutting them until they're for sure yellow, but preferably kind of brown or the purplish brown stage. And that's sort of when the birds start to hit them. So we go through and cut them and lay them out on screens in our barn. You need to have it very well ventilated. They're very prone to molding. We've had issues with that before where, we had them, usually it's the end of October that we're harvesting them. And by then our greenhouse is not really a great drying space anymore. And we've had molding issues in the greenhouse when we've tried to use that. Now we have a setup in our barn with screens, and it's a very well ventilated space. And I guess it's supposed to be good practice to dry them face up, and they dry a little better, I guess. The moisture kind of draws down away from the seeds. And we just wait to process them until they're really crispy. The whole plant matter is just really crispy dry. And we've done a lot of different things for processing. If you're doing a small amount, you can certainly just rub them with your thumbs and the seeds fall out, along with sort of the chaff and the sort of dividers between the seeds. But we found that to be very time consuming, and our thumbs get blisters for us if we do that. So now we rub them through a screen like a hardware cloth. I think we use 1/2 inch. Depending on the size of your sunflower seeds, you could probably do 1/4 inch. 1/2 inch is kind of faster, and you get them all broken apart pretty quickly. There are some pretty neat videos online of people using a bicycle wheel where somebody's sort of on a bicycle on a stand, and they're turning the pedals so that the wheel is up off the ground, so it's not actually pushing you forward, and it's just spinning in the air, and someone else is pushing a sunflower head against the spokes and knocking all the seeds off. So certainly there's some interesting ideas there for getting the seeds broken off of the heads. Rubbing through a screen is what we've been doing. And then you just have to clean the seed, like separate the chaff from the dry seeds, which we use a do-it-yourself seed cleaner, which I'm sure Bauta could let you know more about that. The Bauta initiative has, I think, promoted that machine pretty well. But if you Google DIY seed cleaner, you'll see plans and videos of the machine. You hook it up to a shop vac, and sunflower seeds clean really nicely with it. It's one of the ones I like to demonstrate the machine with, because you just pour in what looks like this mix of seeds and chaff, and you just pour it through, and it comes out clean seeds and chaff. Like, it's really well done. And it'll also clean out empty seeds. Every sunflower head, the biggest and best seeds are around the outer rim. And as you get to the center, the seeds get smaller and smaller. And then there actually end up being seeds that are empty. I call them duds. They're just empty shells. And so the seed cleaner does a great job of just sucking all those out. And you're just left with the good heavy seeds. So so that's what we do at our farm. I can certainly remember when I started farming, I was doing market gardening, and we would be growing different varieties of sunflowers every year for cut flowers for market. And sunflowers are really, they quote unquote self-seed, which really means the birds are dropping seeds everywhere. And that's one of the reasons we decided to just focus on one variety of sunflower, because we're inevitably having sunflowers popping up And you'd have, if you were doing different varieties alternating from year to year, you'd have to really go in and, you know, find your self-seeded sunflowers everywhere and pull them out. But we really enjoyed at that time letting all the self-seeded sunflowers pop up, plus our new ornamental sunflower varieties we were growing, and they would all crisscross, and all the self-seeded ones would be these like amazing crosses between all the ornamental ones. So it can certainly be a very interesting thing to save seeds from sunflowers, even if you know they're crossed. And I think the biggest thing is just, if you are going to share them with people, to be transparent about that, you know, say, this is what we saved from, but it could cross with other things, you know. Yeah, I think transparency is the biggest thing. I don't think that people should not save sunflower seeds just because they might have crossed with something else. They're still going to be usable seeds. They just won't, you won't be necessarily preserving a variety. Yeah, so I don't know, I guess I'm about ready for a question and answer, if kind of zoom through our process, but I'm happy to chat more.
That's awesome. Thanks so much.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We have one offhand.
How many for this project? I think you mentioned that we didn't necessarily have to return the seeds because you have seeds still, but like ours did quite well, and we can return some seeds based on what she was saying. Like we have about 80 plants.
Cool.
And so far none of them have fallen over, but I didn't do any of what you were saying of like cutting, you know, whatever it was, roguing. Yeah. I didn't do any of that. So we've got one that's like 12 feet. It's a little odd. And then there's like, you know, some other ones that just seem odd, but.
Can I share your picture, Amy? I have it later, but I just got one.
I think they're on average like 7 or 8 feet. So
yeah,
I think that seemed a little tall for the variety, but.
Okay, I'm gonna look at this.
So there's 20 in each little clump. There are 4 clumps. And they kind of go back behind there. So
yeah,
hopefully they don't blow down. There's nothing really to support them except each other.
Yeah, and I mean, that's kind of how it goes. Like, it's not to say that every plant that blows down you shouldn't save seed from. I think I remember one fall we had quite a hurricane come through, and in that case, it's, you know, they're gonna blow down. So it's not like you know, I mean, the ones that actually are still standing might have really superior genetics, but it's not gonna really tell you a ton about the you know, the genetics. This definitely is interesting how there are so many different heights. I mean, you've got some little kind of piddly guys down below.
Those are actually branches.
Oh, they're branches. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
is this a branching variety? Okay.
I don't know. It said a little bit of branching, but they're just like the really tiny ones, not like the ones I've seen here at my house from the bird feeder when they're all like, you know, about the same size.
Well, I would definitely look into, just all you have to do is kind of Google the variety, and you'll see sort of what are the characteristics that you should have. Because, for example, if it's supposed to be a single-headed variety, then you wouldn't want to be including the seeds from the branched plant, because it seems like it's like everything. Every kind of crop kind of has what it's trying to revert to, sort of its naturalized form. And I think the naturalized form is branching. So when you have a single-headed variety, you have to kind of actively keep it that way, or it will kind of become a multi-branched. And that's something we've found with ours. And actually with ours, we found it hard to source the seeds, and we found it, I believe it was the Southern Exposure Seed Company or Seed Exchange, that we finally got the seeds from. And we found the first year we grew them that there was like quite a significant number of the plants that had multi-branching. And I sent an email just to ask about that. And they said that they produce their stock seed. So the stock seed is sort of what is supposed to be the best of the best. And they produce their stock seed in a very isolated place so that they know it's like very true to type. And then they contract a really big farm, like in Idaho, to grow out acres and acres and acres of the variety for seed. And in Idaho, there is the wild sunflower. And so he said, then that's the wild sunflower has crossed in. So depending on your original source of the seed, if it was, you know, from the globalized kind of commodity market, then it probably would have been grown in an area where there were the wild sunflowers. And so then what we've been doing very diligently since we learned that is we've been removing the branched plants. And so the first year, we didn't really notice it until it was too late, quote unquote, like the seeds had already been set. And so we just went through when we were harvesting, and we separated out as we're harvesting, okay, these ones we're not saving for seed, these ones we're saving for seed. And that's where you can separate, okay, we're, you know, the branched plants, the plants that are abnormally tall or abnormally short or whatever. And the thing is that yes, some of their pollen has gotten into the other flowers, but you're removing still a lot of those genetics. And so even if you just did that every year, you would start to see an impact for sure. And it still is good seed for sure too. I hope that answers.
Does it make a difference that they were transplanted there?
Oh, you transplanted versus seeded?
Yeah, our community garden didn't open until the end of June because it's so wet there. So I just started them in cups.
Yeah, no, I think that's fine. You'll get some transplant shock, which could impact, you know, the eventual height or something of some of them. But it shouldn't make a big difference for sure. But you could look into, if you look up the variety and try to really read up on it a bit about, like, is it supposed to be single head? What's the height range it's supposed to be? Because maybe it's supposed to be 12 feet tall, in which case that's great. The ones that are 12 feet tall are your best seed for sure. So, but we find it really nice because we have poultry. So we just separate out, you know, the ones we're not going to save seed from are for our poultry, or if we end up getting enough, you know, enough of a scale, then those would be for like pressing into oil or something. Yeah.
And then just to answer quick about the sending the seed back, I think if you have seed to send back and you'd like to do that, we'd be thrilled to receive it. We just didn't want to kind of put pressure on folks that are doing this for the first time, but especially if it looks like there's a low risk of cross and it seems like quality stuff, we'd love to add that to the bank. So that's great.
Yeah. And I think I recall from having done some grow outs, I don't know if you still have you try to collect a bunch of information about the seed. So you can say all that, you know, you can say like there were some that, you know, were branching, and maybe you don't include that in your seed that you're sending back, but even just to make note of that helps probably, right?
Yeah, for sure. I'll send the recording data and stuff once we're coming to the end and folks are ready to do their seed harvest. So that's great. Oh, I think you might be on mute there, Tom.
Got it. Did that do it?
Yeah.
Okay. I wasn't aware that you would need that many seeds per location, right? So we broke our seeds up to kind of get a physical distribution. We didn't want them all in one spot, right? We should really, if we want 80 plants, we'd have had to put them all in one location, right? And we didn't do that. So we'll have to pay a bit more attention to the numbers, not just sunflowers, but any of the seeds.
Yeah. And I think, well, that's where I find this kind of breakdown really helpful, because again, remember, for variety maintenance for sunflowers, it's 20 to 50 plants. So
Right.
even if you have 20 plants in one location, you're still going to be producing a good quality seed.
Yes.
So it's certainly, but the other thing to keep in mind is that those numbers are how many plants you're actually saving seed from. So it's not necessarily just the number of plants that you start with.
Right.
It's the ones that you've actually then selected for the best traits.
Right. So maybe you need 40 plants to get 20 producing at the end.
Yeah, depending on the quality of the seed you're starting with, or the, not necessarily just the quality, but the consistency of it.
And what you're saying, which is, I mean, I've never saved seeds, okay? And most of us, I would say, haven't got a long history of seed saving. Like the garden that we're involved with has been around for a while, but it really hadn't been that. It was like 20 beds or even less. Right now it's probably 50 beds, plus a building and 2 or 3 other things. It's a lot bigger. But by the same token, we're in the middle of a town. Getting any separation, we actually gave our seeds out to some people on the outskirts to try to get them away from other farms, right?
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too, with that selection or roguing process, if you had your 20 to 50 plants in your community garden, and that was the only sunflower growing in that garden at least, and then you couldn't see any other sunflowers, then you could reasonably know that probably the majority of the seeds will be true. And then what you do when you plant them again, first of all, you would communicate, if you're distributing the seeds, that there could be some crosses in there. If someone's just growing them and not saving the seed from them, they'll enjoy the sunflowers. However, I mean, one of the things about sunflowers is, and I think that was my point about the market gardening experience, is even if sunflowers cross, they produce a sunflower that's beautiful, that people will enjoy. And if they're just growing the sunflower for that enjoyment, then your seed's great, and that's fine. If you were then growing your seed out to save again, you would want to plant certainly way more, say at least 50 seed, 50 plants, say, knowing that some percentage of them have crossed, and then you just watch them really carefully. If, for example, your sunflower should have yellow petals and it's coming on bloom time and some of them have purple petals, well, then that those have crossed and you remove them, and so you can sort of try to stay one step ahead of the crossing, through paying attention to your subsequent crops, not just plant them and let them go. You plant them and then carefully you're watching them, and if anything looks off, then you can take them out at that point and kind of keep it.
Yeah. And you say these are bee pollinated. They're not like corn is wind pollinated, I believe. Right.
It is, and wind pollinated crops tend to have an even higher distance that you need for isolation, because the wind carries the pollen farther than a bee will typically travel in a foraging trip.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're a great pollinator plant. The bees love them.
Well, I happen to have a few hives of bees, right? But not in the community garden. I'd like to put one in the garden, but I'm a bit nervous in case ours is right next to a ball field where children play. If you happen to get somebody who is sensitive to, there's bees regardless whether you have a hive there or not, but there's certainly the potential to have a lot more bees if you have a hive around.
Yeah.
Right. We're also using a little bit of, as soon as I think of the name, what is the stuff we're planting for grass instead of grass? Clover, right? As a cover crop, right? To try to suppress a bit of weed growing, and to give us the soil we put in was not especially great, right? That we filled the beds with, and this is all raised beds basically. So we planted clover. Well, that brings bees.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think somebody's having a ride.
Sweet. Did you have a last question there, Amy? I saw you unmute for a sec. But...
I forget.
Okay,
Mom brain.
No problem. Any others from you, Tom, or any other comments from you, Chris?
So where are you located on the South Shore? Because I'm in Digby.
Okay, we're in Laconia, which is right by Wildville.
Okay,
near Bridgewater. Yeah.
Yeah, just as you go across. I know where Wildville is.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
Well, you would come in if you were coming from Digby to Bridgewater. You'd come in the 325.
Right.
And Laconia, we're like 5 kilometers from the 325, pretty much where we are.
Yeah.
So it's a nice spot, pretty tucked away. There's a lot of wild land right around us and stuff. And yeah,
nice.
It's a nice spot for doing seed saving for sure.
I was wondering, that book that you were mentioning, the one by the Seed Savers Exchange, you said it was from the United States. So is it specific information to ours? Like, I think I'm in zone 5 now. I'm in New Brunswick, southeast New Brunswick. So does that make a difference? Like the different varieties that grow in the States would be for warmer climates and like totally different lengths of time to produce seeds and stuff.
Well, they don't, you know,
not if you get
good. Yeah. So the thing, I'm just trying to think, because the other big publication, when I was starting seed saving, it was like the seed saving book called Seed to Seed. And that was also done by the Seed Savers Exchange. And so that's a great one. I don't know if they've updated it, like the copy. Yes, so that one. So that's by the same organization. And the thing about in that one, how they have sort of the different advice for each kind of bioregion. It kind of goes through, like if you're in, you would want to look at the Northeast, like in what they talk about for the Northeast. And the thing about this book that's just totally still as worthwhile, they actually have in the appendix a regional and climatic considerations in seed saving, and it goes into the different parts of the U.S. But you can transfer, you know, Atlantic Canada is a lot like the Northeast. Actually, it says the Northeast and Southeastern Canada. So this this book was written for Canada and the U.S. And the thing about when it gets into the specific varieties or the specific species, it doesn't get as much into like time it takes or something like that. Like it's just talking about here's what you want to look at in terms of, you know, isolation, population, how's the fruit type. It gives kind of a little history of the species, the different types of crops. And so it's totally a really great resource and would still be very worth it. I was really happy to pick it up because I'll look into it. I'll reference for like, oh yeah, like how many, you know, plants should I have for this, or will this cross? I don't remember, or, you know, it's like really a great resource. And yeah,
I'd be interested to know of any other books from either of you that would be good to have in our library at the community garden that we're building. So
I'd say my other go-to, and I didn't bring it today because it doesn't actually get into sunflowers because it focuses just on vegetables. And it's called The Organic Seed Grower. And it's by John Navazio. And it gets really into depth. Like, you know, this book, The Seed Garden, you know, for each species, it's, you know, maybe 2 to 3 pages. They try to really condense the information, and so that makes it a really useful reference book. But if you're really trying to get into the nitty gritty of a specific vegetable crop, he gets very, very in depth. And so it's much more information per crop in that book. It's sort of like the next level, I feel like. Yeah.
And I have one more question. Could I bring the seeds in and dry them by the wood stove? Sorry, she's noisy.
Yeah, that's okay. I got little ones too. They're just not here. Yes, you certainly can. And sunflowers might be a good one for that, because you want to dry them quickly. I mean, with wood stove heat, and we dry a lot of things by the wood stove also. You just want to be careful about like not getting them too hot, because you don't want to cook the seeds, clearly. So having them sort of in the same room as the wood stove, or, you know, a few feet away or something, depending on how hot you get your wood stove, can definitely be useful. Yeah.
You're drying them after you separate them from the flower part, right?
Well, not so much. You want to do the drying on the flower head. So if you were space constrained, you would just cut the flower head and not leave much of a stem. And you would bring them in and lay them ideally face up, but you could have them face down if they were in a very well ventilated space and you knew that they were going to dry quickly. But yeah, you want to lay them out. The thing about having them on the stalk is sometimes you can actually bundle them and then hang them. So if you leave enough of a stem that you can make little bundles, you don't want to have them too big of bundles, but you could like hang them kind of like in the room where you have your wood stove, or in a space that, you know, is really well ventilated and that birds won't get in to eat them. Better to separate the seeds when they're crispy dry, because if the seeds are still moist, you actually risk damaging the seed when you're trying to separate it.
Okay.
You want to wait until the seeds are nice and hard and dry, and then they can withstand being rubbed through a screen without, you know.
Yeah. So is it dry enough in just a shed in this end of Nova Scotia? Like we're in...
Yeah, I mean, it can be. We find it dry enough in our barn.
Yeah, but you're inland a long ways compared to us.
Yes, that's true. So I guess without knowing your specific location, that would be hard to answer. If you had maybe fans set up, that might be enough. You know, if you had them in a shed and a fan, like a box fan blowing on them, that might give just enough ventilation and air movement that even if it's a little more humid or foggy air, they're still going to dry.
Yeah.
You just want to check on them a lot, really. And if they're feeling kind of wet, like I've had sunflower seed heads, they feel wet, you know, because they really have a lot of moisture in them. That's one of the biggest challenges I find with scaling up. I mean, if you're not saving seed from that many sunflowers, you can probably find a spot somewhere to have them that you can keep an eye on them and they'll dry well enough. But our issue is that we're getting into
the fridge,
so
on top
much.
of the freezer.
Yeah. So I mean, for us, we just have our volume is starting to get big enough that it's like, oh geez, how are we gonna have all this dry? And we ended up, I remember last year we had our seed quality heads. We did bundle them up into bunches and hang them. And then we had our sort of, you know, not seed quality, but still, you know, we like to save it for eating and whatever, laid out on screens. So yeah, the bigger the seed head, the more moisture there is too. So if you're dealing with, you know, a variety that has really big seed heads, then then that's, you know, even more of a challenge for sure.
Be a lot of experimenting this year to see what your spaces are like and what might need to be shifted if you want to do it in the future.
Yeah.
Cool.
And they have quite a smell. It's a very distinctive smell. Interesting.
That's great. Well, if folks have no more questions, and I'll just thank you so much to Chris for joining us. I know that these are super useful, not just for folks that are here, but for folks that will watch afterwards. So yeah, I really appreciate your willingness to share your knowledge with us.
Oh, my pleasure. It's great. More seed savers, the better.
Yeah, and thanks so much for you folks for diving in and trying this out. I know it's I don't know, the world of seeds can be a little bit intimidating, but I think it's also really fun. So hopefully it's been a good growing season for you and you have good luck with the saving process.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah. Yeah.
We'll
Have
see
a
you
great
later.
rest of your evening.